In one night, a professor condenses 3,000 years of philosophy into a single lesson. You won't forget. Have you ever wondered why you think the way you think? Why you make the decisions you make? Why the world works the way it works? What you're about to discover in the next few minutes isn't just a history lesson. It's the key to understanding your own mind and the foundation of everything we consider modern civilization. Picture this. A professor walks into his classroom and does something nobody expected. Instead of teaching philosophy the traditional way, with boring dates and names that are impossible to pronounce, he decides to do something radical. He's going to condense 3,000 years of human thought into a single class. A class that will forever change how his students see the world. This isn't a fictional story. This is what happened when humanity itself became that classroom, and the great philosophers became our teachers. Every idea you have, every value you defend, every way you understand reality, it all comes from this story. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand something that very few people comprehend. That you yourself are the result of 3,000 years of the best thinking humanity has ever produced. It all started with a question so simple that it changed the destiny of our species forever. Before there were philosophers, there were people looking up at the sky trying to make sense of it. They didn't have telescopes or textbooks, just their eyes, their instincts, and a desperate need to understand the world around them. For thousands of years, humans answered the big questions with myths. Maybe the world came from a giant egg or was created by gods fighting in the sky. These stories were powerful. They helped people explain the unknown. But then something extraordinary happened. A group of thinkers decided to take a completely different approach. Instead of asking who made the world, they started asking what it was made of. This shift from myth to method is where philosophy is born. And it all started with a man named Thales. Thales lived in a bustling city on the coast of what's now Turkey, around 600 BCE. While everyone around him continued explaining the world through legends, Thales proposed something radical. That the world operated on principles you could observe, analyze, and maybe even predict. His main idea was surprisingly specific. He believed everything came from water. Today that might sound weird, but in Thales's time it was groundbreaking. Water was everywhere. In rain, rivers, the sea, even in living things. It could change forms, liquid, vapor, ice. But what really matters isn't his conclusion, it's his method. He didn't appeal to gods or legends. He looked at the world and tried to explain it using natural causes. That's what made his thinking different. For the first time in human history, someone said, "We don't need fantastic stories to understand reality. We can use our minds to figure it out." Thales opened the door to deeper questions. If everything is made of one thing, what causes it to change? What rules does nature follow? Is there a pattern behind everything we see? This simple question about the origin of the world unleashed a revolution in thinking that continues today. Thales transformed observation into explanation, a move that would shape science, philosophy, and every serious attempt to understand the universe for the next 2,000 years. In a world full of stories, he chose to reason. That's where philosophy took its first real step. Now imagine living in Athens 2,400 years ago. The streets are filled with merchants, politicians, and ordinary citizens discussing the issues of the day. But there's one man walking among them asking questions that nobody else dares to ask. Questions that go straight to the heart of what it means to be human. This man is Socrates, and what he didn't know is that he was about to create the foundation of all Western thought. Together with his successors, Plato and Aristotle, they would form what we call the three pillars of Western philosophy. Socrates didn't write books or build schools. He simply walked the streets of Athens asking questions. Simple questions, sometimes annoying ones, but always with a purpose, to make people think more clearly about what they believed. His method was brilliant in its simplicity. If someone claimed to understand justice, courage, or virtue, he would ask, "What exactly do you mean by that? How do you know it's true? Can it apply in every case?" By doing this, he often revealed that people couldn't fully explain ideas they thought were obvious. But Socrates wasn't doing this to embarrass anyone. He was doing it to expose contradictions and push people toward clearer thinking. What Socrates understood, and what changed everything, is that true wisdom began with recognizing your own ignorance. It's better to admit you don't know than to pretend you do. Then came Plato, Socrates' student, who expanded these ideas by creating a more structured theory of reality. For Plato, what we see around us, objects, people, even events, are just shadows of something deeper and more real. Plato believed that behind everyday appearances exists a realm of perfect, unchanging forms. We can't see perfect beauty or perfect justice in the physical world, but our minds are somehow connected to this invisible realm of perfection. This led to a revolutionary idea, that learning isn't just absorbing new information, it's remembering what the soul already knew. Education becomes a process of inner discovery, not just training. Finally came Aristotle, Plato's student, who took a completely different approach. While Plato focused on ideal forms beyond the physical world, Aristotle focused on the world itself. He believed that knowledge began with what we can see, touch, and experience. Aristotle introduced something we use today, the concept of the four causes. To truly understand something, you need to know what it's made of, what shape or design it has, how it came to be, and what its purpose is. These three men created something extraordinary, a system of thought that could be applied to any question, any problem, any aspect of human life. They weren't just philosophizing. They were creating the mental tools that humanity would use to build science, politics, ethics, and education. Their ideas didn't stay in Athens. They spread throughout the known world and are still alive today in every decision you make, in every argument you construct, in every time you ask yourself, why? But the story of philosophy was far from over. For more than 1,000 years after Aristotle, the world changed dramatically. The Roman Empire expanded, Christianity spread, and the libraries of classical antiquity were closed or destroyed. It seemed like the great experiment of rational thought had come to an end. However, something extraordinary was happening in places nobody expected. In the Islamic world, in Christian monasteries, and eventually in medieval universities, a silent revolution was taking shape. Thinkers weren't abandoning reason or faith, they were building bridges between both. In Baghdad, at the House of Wisdom, scholars of different languages, religions, and backgrounds came together to do something radical: translate and reinterpret the works of Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek thinkers through an Islamic perspective. Thinkers like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and later Avicenna didn't simply copy ancient ideas. They tested them, expanded them, and integrated them into new conceptual frameworks. Logic, metaphysics, ethics, and medicine were all reformed in this process. Avicenna, for example, developed one of the most refined distinctions between essence and existence. Essence is what something is, like the idea of a tree. Existence is whether that thing actually is, whether it's real in the world. From this, he developed a central argument. There must be a being whose essence and existence are identical, something that exists by necessity. Meanwhile, in Europe, another intellectual movement was emerging. Scholastic thinkers like Thomas Aquinas carefully took Aristotle's ideas and combined them with Christian theology. Aquinas believed that truth was unified. If something was true in science or logic and something was true in faith, they had to be part of the same reality. He used this belief to build a structured system of thought that explained everything from ethics and politics to the nature of God and the soul. His famous 5 ways were logical arguments for the existence of God based not on scripture or personal experience, but on observation and reason. For example, things move because something else moved them. Follow that chain back far enough, he argued, and you arrive at a first mover. But the real revolution came with the Renaissance. Renaissance humanists asked a different question than had been asked during the Middle Ages. Instead of how to serve God, they asked, what does it mean to be fully human here and now? Thinkers like Petrarch, Erasmus, and Pico della Mirandola read ancient Greek and Roman texts, not just for historical knowledge, but for insight into ethics, politics, education, and personal growth. They believed that studying the humanities, subjects like literature, history, philosophy, and art, could develop a person's moral character and critical thinking. The goal was to become a well-rounded individual who could engage with the world thoughtfully and responsibly. This new focus on human potential helped spark changes across society. Artists began studying anatomy and perspective to better represent the human form. Writers explored individual identity and emotion. Thinkers began questioning traditional authority and promoting civic responsibility. What these 1,000 years teach us is something crucial. The progress of human thought doesn't stop because of external obstacles. It finds a way. Whether through translation in Baghdad, debate in medieval universities, or rediscovery in the Renaissance, great ideas have a way of surviving and evolving. But then came a moment in the history of thought that would change everything forever. It was the 17th century, and a man named René Descartes was sitting by a stove in a room in Germany, doubting everything he had ever believed he knew. What Descartes didn't know is that he was about to create the foundation of all modern philosophy. And together with thinkers like Spinoza, Locke, Hume, and finally Kant, he was going to awaken something that had been sleeping in the human mind for centuries, the awareness that we can think about our own thinking. Descartes began with doubt, not as a problem, but as a method. He lived in a world full of uncertain knowledge. Old authorities were being questioned, and new scientific discoveries were reshaping how people understood nature. Descartes wanted to build a foundation for knowledge that couldn't be shaken. So he asked a bold question. What, if anything, can I know for certain? To find out, he stripped everything away. Beliefs, assumptions, even the evidence of the senses. If something could be doubted, he set it aside. And eventually, he landed on one thing he couldn't doubt, the fact that he was thinking. Even if everything else was an illusion, the act of thinking proved there was a thinker. This led to his most famous idea. I think, therefore I am. From there, Descartes worked to rebuild knowledge step by step. Starting from this basic certainty, he argued that reason, not experience alone, was the most reliable path to truth. But then came Spinoza, who saw something most people kept separate: nature, reason, and God, and argued they were all the same thing. His central idea was that everything in existence is part of one single substance. This substance isn't a distant personal God. It's one infinite, interconnected reality. In Spinoza's view, God isn't outside the universe intervening in events. God is the universe. Every tree, every thought, every planet, and every law of physics is a part of this one substance expressing itself in different ways. John Locke took a different approach. He saw freedom not as chaos, but as a right, something every person is born with and something no government should take away without good reason. At the heart of Locke's thinking is the idea of natural rights. He argued that all people are born with certain basic rights, life, liberty, and property, simply by being human. The job of government is not to grant these rights, but to protect them. If a government fails to protect people's rights, Locke believed the people have the right to change or overthrow it. Then came David Hume, who didn't try to prove what we believe, but to understand why we believe it. Hume focused on the limits of human knowledge, especially how we come to trust things like cause and effect, identity, and even our sense of self. Hume believed that all knowledge comes from experience. But when we look closer, he argued, many of our big beliefs don't actually come from direct experience. For example, we assume that when one thing happens, like a cue ball hitting another, it causes the next event. But all we really observe is one thing followed by another. Finally came Immanuel Kant, who believed that morality wasn't about what happens, but about what should happen. Kant set out to answer a difficult question. How can we know what's right and wrong, regardless of the situation or outcome? His central idea was called the categorical imperative, a rule that applies universally no matter who you are or what you want. One version of this says, Act only according to principles you could will everyone else to follow. In terms of knowledge, Kant made another big contribution. He argued that we don't just passively receive information from the world. Instead, our minds actively shape how we experience it. Time, space, and cause and effect aren't things we observe out there. They're structures our minds use to make sense of reality. What these modern thinkers did together was extraordinary. They didn't just study the world. They asked how we know what we know. They shifted the focus inward, creating the mental tools to question everything, including our own existence and perception of reality. And now we arrive at the present moment. After this 3,000-year journey, you might be wondering, so what? How does any of this affect me in my daily life? The answer will surprise you. Every thought you have, every decision you make, every way you understand the world around you is built on the foundation these thinkers created. You are the living legacy of 3,000 years of the best thinking humanity has ever produced. When you wake up in the morning and decide what's right, you're using the ethical tools that Aristotle developed. When you question authority or demand evidence before believing something, you're applying the Socratic method. When you value your individual freedom and human rights, you're living Locke's ideas. When you use the scientific method to solve a problem, you're applying the logic that Francis Bacon perfected. When you wonder about the purpose of your life, you're participating in the same quest that obsessed Kant. When you struggle with questions about technology and ethics, you're continuing the work philosophers have been doing for millennia. But there's something deeper here. This story of philosophy isn't just about abstract ideas. It's about the evolution of human consciousness itself. Each generation of thinkers built on the previous one, refining and expanding our capacity to understand not just the world, but ourselves. The ancient Greeks gave us the tools to think logically. Medieval thinkers showed us how to integrate different forms of knowledge. Modern philosophers taught us to question our own thinking processes. Contemporary thinkers are helping us navigate the challenges of technology, globalization, and environmental sustainability. And now it's your turn. You're not just a passive consumer of these ideas. You're an active participant in this 3,000-year conversation. Every time you ask yourself a deep question, every time you examine your beliefs, every time you try to understand the world more clearly, you're adding your voice to this eternal chorus of human inquiry. Philosophy didn't end with the great names we mentioned. It continues in your mind, in your conversations, in your daily decisions. You are both the product of this history and its continuation. Think about it this way. When Thales looked at the world and decided to seek natural explanations instead of mythical ones, he started something. When Socrates walked through the streets of Athens asking uncomfortable questions, he continued something. When Descartes sat by that stove and decided to doubt everything, he deepened something. And when you, in this moment, after this journey through 3,000 years of human thought, decide to examine your own life and beliefs more deeply, you're participating in that same tradition. You're carrying the torch forward. Because in the end, that's what philosophy is. Not a set of fixed answers, but a way of living with the most important questions. A way of staying curious, critical, and engaged with the search for truth, no matter where it leads you. This was the lesson our imagined professor condensed into a single class. That you're not just an isolated individual trying to navigate life on your own. You're part of a conversation that's been unfolding for millennia. You're the heir to the collective wisdom of our species. And the question now is, what are you going to do with that inheritance?